Welcome to Conversations About Grief. Here's our hosts, Steve Davis and the Reverend Ed Arneson.
Hi, I'm Steve Davis. Welcome to Conversations About Grief. This is Reverend Ed Arneson. We're going to be talking about a few things that are going on in the news today and how they may pertain to grief. So I'll let Ed take over.
Hi, everyone. Welcome today. I wanted to say something first that we may needed to have said earlier. You know, when you have a physical ailment, when your knee hurts and you go for 3 or 4 days and you think, I got to go do something about this. The same thing applies when you are experiencing grief and the severity of it seems to be beyond what you expected or beyond what you think you're able to manage at the moment. And there are many people who can help you where you are. You can always go to your faith leader. In my Christian tradition, there are many seminary trained ministers and other ministers who are very capable of dealing with grief and see it all of the time in their ministry. There are professional counselors. In Texas, we call them licensed professional counselors. There are social workers who are trained counselors. There are psychologists. There are psychiatrists. And if you're in one of those situations where you think, this is just a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, I don't know what to do, then by all means, reach out and try to find someone. And you can access these people by talking again to your faith leaders, to community leaders, to your physician and say, who do you know and who's good? And of course, we're all used to checking professionals of any kind out. So don't go without help when you need.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I'll also list some toll-free numbers, some hotline numbers in the video description, and we'll also have them on our upcoming website. I've got to work on that some as well and get the new site ready. But that's always great information because there's just some people that just don't want to ask for help or don't want to admit that they need help because they think it's a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of weakness. It really isn't.
It's a sign of strength.
Yes, yes.
And one other issue that has been on my mind the last little while, and in this country recently, it's always on our minds. And that is, to what degree do we have kind of a floating sense of grief? I think that was present during all of the pandemic, that somehow or the other we were touched by it. And the issue of violence and what happens. Now, all of us probably have ideas about what we think the cause or the solution of violence is. And that's not what I want to talk about a little bit. I want to talk about what happens to me and to Steve and to you when you hear about another tragedy. All of us, I think, resonate even now to the great sorrow and sadness of Sandy Hook. Again, no matter what you think about the situation around it, these dear folks sent their little ones to school and their little ones didn't come home. I dread every year on the anniversary of that because they're going to start texting, they're going to start posting on Facebook, and it is heart-wrenching, and this grief goes on. But it does have an effect on me. And I'm curious as to whether that is prevalent with a lot of folks. All of the acts of violence that we see about and hear about. I've been to San Jose once in my life for a very, very brief time when I was in California traveling. But when you hear that these people lost their lives at work from another work caused by another worker they'd worked with for a long time, and all of a sudden their lives are totally disrupted and really in great disarray. Does that affect us? Does that affect us internationally? Does that affect us nationally? I think there is no doubt that 9/11 affected all of us. And if you're old enough, I remember and have said this before, that the death of JFK certainly affected all of us. So that's an interesting idea to me, not that we can do any research, but anecdotally, your suggestions, your ideas, how that affects you would be really interesting and really helpful to us, and we'd love to hear from you about it. One other issue that has been on my mind is about grief and the different pieces. What I think is grief education, grief education, then grief therapy, grief counseling, whatever words you want to apply, can do one thing. You can't train yourself out of it. You can't be educated enough not to grieve. But what you can do is you can see that there are some road signs. And you pass that sign and you say, oh, maybe this means that's where I am in my dealing with my grief. I know someone I've known since she was born. When you're my age, you know a lot of people like that. And she lives a long way from me, and I have not seen her or had real personal contact with her other than social media in many, many, many years. Her first husband died. She had someone that she really cared about, and this person died also. A dear relative who had been such a sweet and loving person, and I knew her well. At the end of her life, she suffered from the horrible disease of Alzheimer's, and her personality changed, and all of the sweetness was gone. This person now, perhaps, the residue of all of that loss, and I suspect this person is trying to deal with it, but I think sometimes we find that, oh, I wonder why I am so angry, why I am so emotional, why I am so disinterested in eating, or why I am so disinterested in being with other people. And I think the residuals of grief may stay with us a long time. COVID, there is this thing called long haulers, and I'm familiar with that. And I think grief is kind of like that. I think grief can leave its markers. Now, I subscribe to the idea that you never get over a significant loss. You may be at peace with grandma who died, who was 97. You may come to say she had a wonderful life and she contributed so much to me in my life and my family. Yet there is that sense of, if you back that up on the scale of what's the highest priority or the highest experience of grief, probably the loss of a child. And so that can lead to a very difficult sense of, how on earth do I ever trust the world again? So grief can find a way to be present. And in its presence, grief is non-discriminating. It affects everything. And we can move through the process, but at the end of it, we may be able, as I have said before in the past, at first when you're trying to deal with the memories that grandma, for instance, it's like swallowing barbed wire. Eventually, those memories with someone like grandma will become like a diamond on black velvet. It's so precious to go back to that. It's so reassuring. And families get together and they tell grandma stories and they laugh and they go on. If it's the loss of a child, it's not so simple. So grief is pervasive, persistent. Perhaps it is almost able to find the weaknesses to exploit.
Yes, I'd agree. I definitely agree with that statement. Grief hits everybody at some point. It's some may be luckier than others. They don't experience it as much or as early as some, but it will eventually catch up to you, just like anything else. It's always an ever-present thing. But what I was going to ask about when you talked about San Jose and things like that, and this is not any sort of political or undercurrent message, okay?
Right.
But there have been these types of events get covered a lot in the news. Are we growing numb as a society from it happening so often that it's not the same as if this was the very first, as if this was Columbine, which wasn't even the first school shooting, but Columbine was the larger one that everybody remembers. It was like, oh man, that was so. Are we so numb to it now that?
I guess the short answer is yes. And that was kind of why I was asking my question. How, I think that's what went on during the pandemic. And there's a self-defensive measure in that. I've got to let this roll off my back because I can't just tolerate more and more and more and more. And I think the issue for me is that the issue becomes that, yes, you protect yourself, you build up defenses, you do explanations, rationalizations. You know, I heard enough. How many have we had this year? We live close to a city that has an enormous homicide rate, an enormous one. And it's like every day or two, you hear about this. Well, intuitively and educationally, you know, there are people who were close to that who are suffering greatly. And my point is, how far outside of that circle, how far outside does the pebbles ripples go? How far do they go? And how do they affect us? And is it okay for us, for me, or for you as individuals to say the way I'm taking care of this is what you're saying is that so much of it has come that I've just kind of defended myself against it. And as the saying goes, I've just got a tough skin about it. It's not going to affect me. I don't know what to think about that.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether I think that's a good attribute for me or not. I honestly don't. I think there are ways in which it is. It's good. As I've said before, denial works for a while, you know. That didn't happen.
Yes.
So it's the things that are involved in this process of grieving.
Okay.
I think one other step, and then maybe that's enough, is think about if you are in a faith community or a community or in a organization, vocation. How far does it go from the people who were affected beyond that? In a faith community, in my experience, very often the grief can be universal within the community in a relatively small community because everyone has interacted with this person that's gone and they knew this person, they loved them, and they understood them. And so I struggle with this and trying to do research and learn more. And I just think that it is at the core of our ability to understand and relate to grief. And back to what you said earlier, and to understand that it's okay to try to get help in this process.
Yes. Great points there. Yes. one thing, and this doesn't have to do with grief, but one thing that I started doing years ago, I was in a business coaching program at the time, which helped me grow my business at that time
Right.
very much. One of the things that the founder of this business coaching program said is, if you want to improve your attitude almost immediately, which will increase your sales, cause more business, cause more happiness, do one thing: stop watching the news. And I said, that sounds interesting. Occasionally, I might catch a snippet or two on YouTube. I have not watched network news. I don't have cable. I cut the cable. I'm a streamer, but I typically watch exactly what I want. I don't watch a full news broadcast. I haven't in quite some time. I mean, years and years, probably at least 10 years, I haven't watched the news. And that's
interesting. I'm
Yes.
just the opposite.
Yes.
I'm not a news junkie. I don't watch it 24 hours, but I do watch it. And I also have thought about this, that somehow it creates in me the sense that I am connected to the world. I'm connected to these things. I agree with you. It's easy to get overdosage.
Yes.
Easy to
Yes.
be overdosed.
Yes.
But for me, just for me, the deal is that I want to know what's going on. I want to hear about it. I want to at least have a passing knowledge of it. There is a fascinating thing beyond the realm of grief about we have a tendency to think at times, I believe, that the news creates some of the problems we have.
Yes.
Well, perhaps, but there is also another idea that the news perhaps solves some of the problems we have. And I think both of those things are true.
Perhaps. Yes.
And this is a far afield from grief, but anyway,
Yes.
I understand what you're saying, and that's an interesting thought, though, that people who report about this stuff.
Yeah, I don't know how. How they do it.
I remember, and again, I may have said this. I will say a lot of things again. On the day of Sandy Hook, they were bringing in more officers, and an officer came who was not a rookie, but he had not been on scene. And so his supervisor, Sergeant Arneson, said, let's go, and I want to warn you, this will be the worst day of your life.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yes.
sure it was.
Yes.
So grief gives us a chance to grow, gives us a chance to get better, gives us a chance to put things in perspective. It gives us a chance to see ourselves in a different way and to have a kind of strange sense of pride. That may be a strong word, that I got through this and that I'm better and that I can deal with the loss and I have kept that person close to me in a way that no one would ever know or understand, and I'm so happy that person is part of me. So I hope we can continue our conversations, and I hope you will join us in the conversation.
Yes. Yes. Great. Thank you so much. That's going to conclude this episode for Conversations About Grief. If you have any questions about grief, please email us, conversationsaboutgrief@gmail.com. Starting this past week, we started putting Conversations About Grief out on some more platforms. We should be coming up on Spotify soon, some of the other platforms. I want to try to get us on every single podcast platform, so that way not just the YouTubers can see us, but we'll be out there for everybody else. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Say what you need to say. Say what you need to say. Say what you need to say. Say what you need to say.
Thank you for listening today. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions about grief, please email us at conversationsaboutgrief@gmail.com.